The rain beat persistently on the windows of the small two-bedroom house, where Margaret, a 40-year-old woman with brown hair already showing the first premature grey strands, folded work uniforms on the time-stained kitchen table. Her brown eyes, though deeply tired and marked by purple dark circles, still shone even when her body begged for rest. With precise but slow movements, she sorted clothes for her 3 different jobs. The faded blue uniform for morning cleaning at the downtown office, the once white, now yellowed apron from the busy lunch diner, and the red blouse with the logo of the supermarket where she worked until the early hours of the morning. Her hands, rough and calloused from constant work with chemicals and excessive weight, trembled slightly as she checked the schedules meticulously noted in a worn notebook, its yellowed pages filled with budget calculations and reminders of bills to pay. Alexander, her 15-year-old son with features reminiscent of his deceased father, studied concentrated at the living room table, completely oblivious to the silent and heroic sacrifices happening just a few meters away. "Mom, are you okay? You look more tired today than yesterday," said Alexander, raising concerned eyes from his math books, noticing his mother's trembling hands. "I'm great, my love. Just a little normal fatigue from work. Keep studying. You need to pass the entrance exam and achieve all your dreams." Margaret forced a smile, hiding the pain that had been throbbing in her chest for weeks, while carefully storing the sale documents of the land in the bottom of a warped drawer of the old dresser, those yellowed papers representing the only inheritance left by her parents. A piece of fertile and well-located land worth exactly enough to fully pay for the business administration degree that Alexander had dreamed of pursuing since childhood. She had crafted a careful lie for her son, inventing a story about an academic merit scholarship, when in fact she had sold the cherished land to an unscrupulous developer who would build a residential complex on the sacred place where she played as a child, where she learned to ride a bicycle, and where her parents taught her about honesty and hard work. The emotional weight of this decision squeezed her chest like a closed fist, making her wake up in the middle of the night with her heart racing. But Margaret knew deep in her soul that it was the only possible way to give her son the bright future he deserved, and for which she was willing to sacrifice everything. Her nights were filled with endless numbers and complicated accounts, obsessively calculating every penny earned and spent so that Alexander would never suspect the painful truth behind his education. "Promise me you'll always be honest with me, Alexander." "Honesty is a family's most valuable treasure," murmured Margaret, watching her son concentrated on his studies with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "Of course, Mum. I've always been honest with you. But why are you saying this now? Did something happen that should worry me?" Oastutudi, 3 months later, on a particularly stormy night that seemed to reflect the internal chaos of her life, Margaret arrived home after an especially exhausting shift at the supermarket, carrying heavy shopping bags she got with her employee discount, feeling the world violently spinning around her as if she were on an out-of-control carousel. Her legs, which had supported her through 16 consecutive hours of work on that hellish day, simply gave way at the kitchen doorstep, and she lost her strength and fell, fainting on the threshold, her belongings scattering across the floor, pain medications and a few coins across the floor soaked by the rain coming through the poorly closed window. Alexander found his mother a few hours later, when he returned from a study group at a classmate's house, and saw her pale as paper, breathing with frightening difficulty and moaning softly in a state of semi-consciousness, which made him immediately call an ambulance in complete despair, his hands trembling so much he almost dropped the phone. In the crowded public hospital with a strong smell of disinfectant, the on-duty doctor, a middle-aged man with a serious and tired expression, explained in technical terms that Margaret suffered from a severe and potentially fatal heart condition, most likely aggravated by chronic stress, poor nutrition and extreme physical and emotional exhaustion that her body simply could no longer endure. "Mrs. Margaret, you need to understand the severity of the situation. You need to stop working immediately and follow a rigorous treatment," said the doctor, adjusting his glasses and flipping through the medical chart with evident concern. "Doctor, I cannot stop working even for a day. My son needs to study, needs to have a better future than mine, and I am all he has in the world." But Margaret, driven by a fierce and irrational maternal love that overcame any basic instinct of self-preservation, completely and deliberately ignored all serious medical recommendations, as if the doctor's words were merely optional suggestions and not a matter of life and death. The morning after her hospital discharge, still feeling dizzy and with chest pains radiating down her left arm, she was again on her feet before dawn, meticulously preparing Alexander's nutritious breakfast with the few ingredients she had at home and getting dressed in pressed clothes to go to the first of 3 jobs awaiting her. She hid the expensive and essential medications in an old dusty cosmetics box stored at the back of the bathroom cabinet and blatantly lied about follow-up medical appointments, telling her worried son they were just preventive routine exams that all women her age needed to have regularly. Each day that slowly passed, Margaret felt her heart failing a bit more, the palpitations becoming more frequent and intense, but she continued to force a smile and work non-stop, fueled exclusively by the burning and unwavering hope of seeing Alexander graduated, successful and happy, even if it cost her own life. The years dragged on like this, heavy as lead, with Margaret carrying completely alone the terrible burden of her deteriorating health condition, while investing every precious drop of her remaining vital energy in the promising future of the son she loved more than her own existence. "Mom, are you absolutely sure you're okay?" "Sometimes you get short of breath and put your hand on your chest," Alexander asked one of those mornings, with the penetrating look of someone beginning to suspect. "It's just accumulated fatigue from work, dear. Nothing a little rest won't fix. Soon you'll graduate from college and we can rest together, maybe even travel a bit." 20 years passed like a nebulous blur of hard work, constant sacrifice, and unconditional love that never faltered even for a moment. Margaret, now a dignified 60-year-old lady with completely grey hair styled in a simple but careful manner, and deep wrinkles marking each year of tireless struggle on her face, walked slowly through the endless corridors of polished marble in the imposing mansion that Alexander had built with the resounding success of his prosperous and nationally recognized management company. Her hands, once rough and calloused from heavy manual labor, now constantly trembled, not just from the accumulated fatigue of decades, but from advanced age and the serious heart condition she had never adequately treated due to lack of resources and time. Alexander, completely transformed into a respected millionaire businessman of 35, tall and elegant in his custom-made suits, crafted by the best tailors in the city, had married 5 years ago to Victoria, a stunning 30-year-old woman with perfectly arranged blonde hair in sophisticated styles, always impeccable nails done weekly at the best salons, and a calculated smile that never reached her cold eyes when she looked directly at her mother-in-law with barely disguised disdain. The mansion was a true palace of luxury and ostentation, with breathtaking landscaped gardens, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a panoramic view of the city. But for Margaret, it often seemed more like a golden prison where she could not find her place or feel truly welcome. "Margaret, could you avoid walking barefoot through the house? It's so rustic and inappropriate for our social position," Victoria commented coldly, examining her own freshly done nails as if they were works of art. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I've always walked like this at home since childhood. It's an old habit I have difficulty changing. I'll try to wear slippers from now on." Face, Victoria never missed a single opportunity to make subtly cruel and venomous comments about her mother-in-law, always with a tone of aristocratic superiority that cut like a sharp blade through Margaret's dignity. She mercilessly criticized the way Margaret dressed, calling her simple but clean clothes outdated and embarrassing, cruelly mocked her humble way of speaking, calling it clumsy and classless, and constantly suggested to Alexander, in front of important visitors, that his mother was losing her mind with age when Margaret forgot some completely unimportant detail or confused the name of an occasional guest. Alexander, completely absorbed by the complex business and demanding social commitments that his prominent position in society imposed, rarely noticed these veiled and systematic psychological aggressions, or when he eventually noticed something strange in his wife's behavior, he consciously chose to ignore it to maintain domestic peace and avoid conflicts that could affect his carefully constructed public image. Margaret endured everything in absolute silence, swallowing each painful humiliation, as she had swallowed endless years of physical pain and extreme fatigue, always inflexibly prioritizing her son's happiness and well-being above her own personal dignity and shattered self-esteem. "Alexander, your mother left water running in the bathroom again this morning. She's becoming very careless lately. Perhaps she needs professional help," Victoria reported during the elegant dinner, delicately cutting a piece of salmon. "My mother has always been a careful and responsible person, Victoria. I'm sure it was just a minor accident of no importance. We all make small mistakes sometimes." On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, while Victoria had gone out for an extended session at the most expensive beauty salon in the city for aesthetic treatments, and Alexander was in a crucial business meeting with international investors, Margaret lovingly decided to bring fresh coffee and some homemade cookies to his office, as she occasionally did since coming to live in the mansion. A small gesture of maternal care that made her feel useful and connected to her son. The room was absolutely imposing and intimidating, decorated with tall bookshelves of imported noble wood, original paintings by renowned artists that cost more than an entire house, a gigantic mahogany executive desk where Alexander conducted million-dollar business deals that moved unimaginable fortunes, and business recognition trophies shining under the golden light that entered through the enormous windows overlooking the city. It was then that Margaret, while carefully placing the tray on a free corner of the desk, noticed some important documents purposefully spread across the waxed surface, official papers with impressive corporate logos and legal stamps that immediately caught her experienced attention from someone who had worked in offices for years. Approaching with natural curiosity and instinctive maternal concern, she immediately recognized the familiar name of the first company Alexander had founded, with much sweat and determination, using the initial investments obtained thanks to the secret and sacrificial sale of her precious inheritance. The company that had immeasurable and irreplaceable sentimental value, as it concretely represented her son's decisive first step toward the extraordinary success she had always dreamed for him. "This cannot be happening to the company we built together," Margaret murmured softly, holding the papers with visibly trembling hands and racing heart. "I urgently need to discover what is happening behind the scenes before it's too late to prevent some financial tragedy." Margaret meticulously examined each page of the complex documents with redoubled attention, her tired but still perceptive eyes straining intensely to understand all the complicated legal technical terms and contractual clauses full of specialized language that seemed purposefully confusing. The company would be sold for an alarmingly below-market value to a competitor nationally known for unfair and unethical business practices, and all preliminary signatures were already mysteriously in advanced progress, with only a few final documents missing to complete the irreversible transaction. What disturbed her most deeply and made her heart race dangerously was gradually discovering that the documents contained highly confidential and strategic information that only someone extremely close to Alexander, with privileged access to the most intimate business secrets, could have obtained and passed on to interested buyers. Margaret felt an explosive mixture of panic, betrayal, and maternal indignation as she slowly realized that someone from within the family circle was deliberately betraying her son's sacred trust, cowardly selling not just a profitable company, but precious years of hard work, complete dedication, and dreams fulfilled through much effort and personal sacrifice. She mentally recorded all important details and relevant numbers, memorizing crucial names, values, and dates, and decided with unwavering determination that she urgently needed to confront the person responsible for this despicable betrayal before it was too late to completely prevent the consummation of this criminal transaction. Who would have the courage and coldness to do such terrible things to Alexander after everything he has honestly achieved? Margaret thought anxiously, feeling her chest dangerously tighten with anxiety. I need to protect my son in any way possible, as I have always done throughout life, even if it costs me my own existence. Just when Victoria finally returned from the beauty salon 2 hours later, proudly displaying a new modern haircut that had cost a small fortune and freshly done nails with sophisticated artistic design, Margaret was patiently waiting in the luxurious living room with the incriminating documents in hand. Sitting in an Italian leather armchair with a serious and determined expression she rarely showed. Victoria entered the mansion laughing loudly on her golden phone, animatedly talking about an extravagant charity party, she would organize at the end of the month to impress high society. But her radiant and artificial smile instantly disappeared, as if it had been erased by a breaking light upon seeing her mother-in-law sitting there, with a dignified yet threatening posture. Margaret rose slowly from the armchair, feeling her legs tremble like leaves in the wind, but proudly maintaining the natural dignity that had always characterized her, even in the most difficult and humiliating moments of her trial-filled life. She extended the papers toward her daughter-in-law with a firm and controlled gesture, carefully observing every micro-expression on Victoria's perfectly made-up face, desperately looking for revealing signs of guilt, nervousness, or any reaction that could confirm her growing suspicions about who was really behind this devastating family betrayal that could destroy everything Alexander had tirelessly worked for over decades. "Victoria, I urgently need to talk to you about these extremely important documents I found in Alexander's private office," Margaret said, with a firm but respectful voice, maintaining a civilized tone. "Do you know anything concrete about this mysterious sale of the company that has so much sentimental and financial value for him and our entire family?" Victoria's face changed instantly, moving from initial surprise to an expression of barely disguised fury. She advanced toward Margaret with quick, decisive steps, her high heels echoing on the marble floor like hammer blows. Without any ceremony, Victoria brusquely took the papers from her mother-in-law's hands, making Margaret back away frightened, and in the sudden movement, one of the sheets accidentally tore, leaving pieces of paper scattered on the floor. Victoria's eyes shone with a rage she had never shown so openly, and her voice came out in a strident scream that echoed throughout the mansion, finally revealing her true cruel and manipulative nature. "You were messing with my husband's things. What else did you take, you meddling old woman?" Victoria yelled, pointing an accusing finger at Margaret. "How long have you been snooping around where you shouldn't, hoping no one notices your little investigations?" Margaret remained motionless for a few seconds, processing her daughter-in-law's sudden and disproportionate aggressiveness, feeling a mixture of shock and indignation at that violent reaction that seemed to have been previously rehearsed. The atmosphere in the room changed completely, as if a storm had entered through the front door, and Margaret realized she was facing a Victoria completely different from the calculating but contained woman she had known for years. The torn pieces of paper on the floor seemed to symbolize much more than a simple accident. They represented the definitive rupture of any pretense of civility between the two women, and Margaret instinctively felt that this moment would mark the beginning of something much more sinister and dangerous. Victoria remained standing, breathing heavily with clenched fists and an expression of barely disguised triumph in her eyes, as if she had finally found the perfect excuse she had been looking for so long to justify her growing hostility against the unwanted mother-in-law. "Victoria, please calm down. We can talk about this in a civilized manner, without shouting or aggression," Margaret said with a trembling but firm voice. "I didn't come here to create problems. I just want to protect my son from any situation that could harm him or put at risk everything he has built." Margaret stepped back a few paces, feeling her heart dangerously accelerate and her blood pressure rise alarmingly, but maintained her dignity even in the face of her daughter-in-law's unreasonable aggression. She breathed deeply, trying to control the situation that was quickly getting out of hand, and responded with the tranquility of someone who had faced much more difficult situations throughout a life of sacrifices and hardships. However, something in Victoria's calculating eyes warned her that this argument wasn't just about the documents found. There was a more sinister intention behind that exaggerated reaction, as if Victoria had been waiting precisely for an opportunity like this to execute a previously elaborated plan. Margaret realized she was being manipulated, but still couldn't imagine how far her daughter-in-law's cruelty could go, nor the extremes to which she would be willing to go to get rid of the unwanted presence of her mother-in-law in the luxurious mansion. "Victoria, I'm only concerned about Alexander's well-being and wanted to understand what was happening with his company," Margaret explained calmly, trying to appease the situation. "I had no intention of invading your privacy, but as a mother, I have the right to worry about my son and protect him from any danger." In the hours that followed, Victoria put into practice a diabolical plan she had architected months ago, waiting only for the perfect moment to execute it with surgical precision. She discreetly took one of her most valuable jewels, a stunning diamond necklace that Alexander had given her as a wedding present, a unique piece valued at hundreds of thousands that symbolized the love and trust between the couple, and carefully hid it in Margaret's modest room, placing it inside a drawer among the mother-in-law's simple clothes. The jewel was strategically positioned to make it seem as if it had been hastily hidden, as if someone had tried to conceal the stolen object but hadn't managed to find a safer place to keep it. Victoria then returned to her room, pretended to desperately search for the jewel, and began a calculated scandal, shouting and crying like a consummate actress playing the role of an innocent victim of a heinous crime committed inside her own home. "Alexander, Alexander, my diamond necklace is gone, the one you gave me at our wedding?" Victoria shouted theatrically, running through the corridors of the mansion. "Someone entered our room and stole the most precious jewel I have. How could this have happened in our own home?" That same night, Alexander had organized an important dinner with influential international investors, powerful businessmen who could determine the future of his business and significantly expand his financial empire to global markets. The table in the main hall was elegantly set with the best crystal, gleaming silverware, and sophisticated floral arrangements that cost more than the monthly salary of many families, creating an atmosphere of luxury and sophistication that would impress even the most demanding guests accustomed to ostentation. Margaret, wearing her best dress, simple but clean and well-maintained, had respectfully joined the dinner as Alexander had requested, sitting discreetly at one end of the table so as not to draw unnecessary attention to herself. The guests were animatedly discussing business, economic policy, and investment opportunities, while Margaret listened silently, proud to see how her son had become a respected and successful man in the world of international business. "Gentlemen, I would like to introduce my mother, Margaret, who has always been my greatest inspiration and support in all difficult moments," Alexander said politely to the investors. "Everything I've accomplished today, I owe to the teachings and sacrifices she made for me throughout my entire life, and I am very proud to have her here with us." It was exactly in the middle of dinner, when the investors were most relaxed and impressed with the hospitality and sophisticated environment, that Victoria executed the cruelest part of her Machiavellian plan. She abruptly stood up from the table, interrupting an important conversation about a multi-million-dollar business merger, and began to cry copiously, drawing the attention of everyone present with a performance worthy of theatrical awards. With a choked voice and trembling hands, she told the shocked guests about the theft of her most precious jewel, describing in detail the sentimental and financial value of the piece, and suggesting with tears in her eyes that someone from the household itself had committed this terrible crime against the family. The investors became visibly uncomfortable with the embarrassing situation, whispering among themselves and exchanging looks of surprise and judgment, while Alexander felt his carefully built reputation beginning to crumble before his eyes. "Please, Victoria, let's resolve this after dinner. Our guests don't need to worry about domestic matters." Alexander tried to control the situation, visibly nervous. "I'm sure there's a simple explanation for this. Perhaps you've just forgotten where you put the jewel. These things happen to all of us." But Victoria didn't stop her convincing performance. On the contrary, she intensified the drama of the situation even more, rising from her chair and walking theatrically around the room like a desperate and betrayed woman. She then suggested, with a false innocence that only Margaret could perceive, that perhaps they should search for the jewel in all the rooms of the house, starting with her mother-in-law's room, since she had been seen meddling with things she shouldn't during the afternoon. The investors, already completely involved in the unexpected family drama, agreed it was a sensible idea, and some even offered to help with the search, transforming the business dinner into an amateur police investigation. Margaret felt her blood freeze in her veins as she realized where the situation was heading, but still maintained her composure and agreed to allow the search of her room, confident that nothing would be found because she would never take something that didn't belong to her. "I have nothing to hide, and I accept that you search my room. My conscience is clear," Margaret said with dignity, rising from the table. "I have always taught my son about honesty and would never do anything that contradicted the values I tried to pass on to him throughout his life." The embarrassing procession headed to Margaret's modest bedroom, located in a simpler wing of the mansion, far from the luxurious quarters of the main couple. Victoria led the group with convincing tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, followed by the curious and uncomfortable investors, Alexander with an expression of growing concern, and Margaret walking with the dignity of someone who had nothing to fear. When they reached the room, Victoria immediately went to the old dresser where Margaret kept her few clothes, and with a precision too suspicious to be coincidence, opened exactly the drawer where she had strategically hidden the diamond necklace a few hours earlier. The cry of discovery she let out upon finding the jewel was so loud and dramatic that it echoed throughout the wing of the mansion, and immediately all eyes turned to Margaret with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and silent judgment that cut through the poor lady's heart like a sharp dagger. "My God, here is my necklace! It was hidden among her clothes!" Victoria exclaimed theatrically, holding the jewel as evidence of a crime. "How could you do this to me, Margaret? How could you steal something so precious and meaningful from your own family?" Margaret was completely stunned, as if she were in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. Her legs trembled so much that she could barely stand, and her already fragile cardiac heart began to beat irregularly and dangerously, sending waves of pain through her chest and left arm. She vehemently denied the accusation with a voice that trembled not from guilt, but from deep indignation and devastating emotional shock, trying to explain to all present that she would never touch something that didn't belong to her, that she had been raised with solid values of honesty and integrity that she would never abandon. But Victoria did not allow her mother-in-law to defend herself adequately, interrupting each attempt at explanation with new, even more serious accusations, dramatically mentioning that Margaret had been seen tampering with confidential documents in Alexander's office, suggesting a pattern of suspicious and invasive behavior that painted a terrible picture of the accused's personality. "I swear on the memory of my parents, and by all that is sacred, that I never took this jewel. Someone is lying here," Margaret desperately protested, her hands trembling. "Alexander, my son, you've known me all your life. How can you believe that I would be capable of stealing anything from you?" But Alexander, pressured by the embarrassing social situation and concerned above all with his professional image before the important investors who could make or break his future business, did not immediately defend his mother as she expected and deserved. Instead, he remained silent for long agonizing seconds, clearly torn between filial love and the social and financial pressures that weighed on his shoulders like an immovable mountain. The investors murmured among themselves, visibly uncomfortable with the domestic situation that had exploded right in front of them, and some were already discreetly signaling that perhaps it would be better to end the meeting and discuss business at a more appropriate time. Victoria realized she had Alexander exactly where she wanted him, vulnerable, pressured, and willing to do anything to save his business reputation, even if it meant sacrificing his own mother on the altar of social convenience and financial success. "Alexander, you need to take decisive action now. Everyone is seeing what happened here. How are you going to handle this situation?" Victoria pressed, placing her hand on her husband's shoulder. "Your company, your reputation, everything is at stake. The investors are watching how you resolve family problems. Show what kind of leader you are." The psychological and social pressure finally broke Alexander's resistance, and he exploded in a fury that combined public shame, business pressure, and emotional manipulation skillfully orchestrated by his calculating wife. He turned to his mother with an expression of anger and disappointment that Margaret had never seen in his loving eyes, and his voice came out in a loud, harsh tone that cut her heart more deeply than any physical dagger could have done. In front of all the embarrassed investors, the employees who had gathered discreetly in the hallway to witness the family drama, and Victoria, who could barely hide a triumphant smile behind her fake tears, Alexander uttered the most painful words Margaret had ever heard in her entire life of suffering and sacrifice. The environment fell completely silent after the shout, as if even the walls of the mansion were shocked by the cruelty of that moment that would forever change the dynamics of that destroyed family. "You are a thief. Get out of this house. I can no longer have someone I cannot trust living under my roof," Alexander shouted, pointing to the door. "After everything I've done for you, after all the affection I've given you, this is how you repay me. Leave my house right now." Margaret felt a deep pain in her chest, both emotional and physical. her heart condition intensely manifesting in the face of unbearable emotional pain. The cruel words of the son she had raised with so much love and sacrifice hit her like precise bullets, each word echoing in her mind like a death sentence for all the dreams and hopes she had nurtured during decades of hard work. Unable to utter a single word of defense or farewell, she slowly walked to her room under the judgmental gazes of all those present, gathered only some basic clothes in a small worn leather suitcase she had bought decades ago, and left the luxurious mansion that she had never really considered her home. The rain that had begun to fall during the night created a perfect melancholic atmosphere for that moment of absolute desolation, and Margaret walked out the front door without looking back, carrying only her wounded dignity and the crushing weight of family betrayal. My God, what did I do wrong to deserve this? How can the son I raised with so much love treat me like this? Margaret thought, walking slowly through the rain. Perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps I really don't belong in this world of luxury and falsehood that I no longer recognize. Margaret walked alone through the deserted streets of the rainy dawn, each step weighing like lead, while the icy rain penetrated her simple clothes and wet her grey hair, creating small streams that ran down her face, mixing with the silent tears that finally began to fall after being contained for so long. The small suitcase she carried seemed to weigh tons, not because of its material content, but because of the painful symbolism of an entire life being reduced to a few pieces of clothing and personal objects with no monetary value but full of precious memories. Her legs, already weakened by age and neglected health problems, began to progressively fail, and she felt her chest tighten in a different and more intense way than any previous pain, as if an invisible hand was squeezing her heart with increasing force. The street was completely deserted at that hour of the dawn, with no cars passing by nor pedestrians who could offer help, and Margaret realized that she was completely alone in the world for the first time in her life, with nowhere to go and no one to trust. I can't give up now. I need to find a place to spend the night, and then figure out what to do with the rest of my life, Margaret murmured to herself, fighting against the growing pain. Alexander may have thrown me out, but I still have dignity and strength to survive, as I have always done throughout my life of hardships. It was then that the pain in her chest suddenly intensified alarmingly, radiating through her left arm and up to her neck, while an overwhelming sensation of dizziness took over her entire body, already debilitated by decades of excessive work and accumulated emotional stress. Margaret tried to support herself on a nearby lamppost, but her legs gave way completely, and she collapsed on the wet asphalt of the deserted street, her small suitcase opening and scattering her few belongings across the soaked sidewalk like pathetic symbols of a life of sacrifices that had apparently ended in abandonment and loneliness. Her old and simple cell phone fell far from her trembling hands, sliding a few meters across the wet surface until it stopped under a parked car, and its cracked screen still displayed an old, faded photo of her with Alexander as a child, both smiling happily in simpler times when the love between mother and son was pure and unconditional. The night was slowly advancing, and no car passed through that quiet residential street. No pedestrian walked by at that late hour, and Margaret remained unconscious on the cold, wet ground, completely invisible and forgotten by the world that continued to spin indifferent to her suffering. Please let someone find me. I still have so much to live for, so much to clarify, Margaret thought in her last moments of consciousness, looking up at the rainy sky. Alexander, my boy, forgive your mother for not being strong enough to prove my innocence. I love you more than my own life. The first ray of sunlight of the morning weakly illuminated Margaret's pale face, still unconscious on the wet asphalt, when a neighbor from the street, a middle-aged woman called Mrs. Nancy by the residents of the neighborhood, went out to get the newspaper and saw that disturbing scene of an elderly woman fallen on the sidewalk. Mrs. Nancy immediately ran back inside her house shouting for her husband, who called emergency services, while she tried to check if Margaret was still breathing, carefully placing a coat over the cold body of the stranger. The ambulance arrived in a few minutes, and the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Margaret, who still showed weak but constant vital signs, before transporting her to the nearest public hospital. During the frantic journey through the awakening city, Margaret floated between consciousness and unconsciousness occasionally murmuring Alexander's name between heartbreaking moans of pain that broke the hearts of the professionals trying to keep her alive. "Please stay with me, ma'am. We're taking you to receive all necessary medical care," said the paramedic, monitoring her vital signs. "Is there someone we can call to inform about your condition? Any close family member who should know that you are here?" At the hospital, Margaret was immediately directed to the cardiac intensive care unit, where a specialized medical team worked tirelessly for several hours to stabilize her critical condition and prevent her already weakened heart from completely stopping. The tests revealed that she had suffered a severe acute myocardial infarction, complicated by a pre-existing heart condition that had been neglected for decades, and the doctors explained to the nursing staff that it would be a miracle if she survived the next crucial 48 hours. Among the nurses assigned to care for Margaret was Lisa, a young professional of 25, with brown hair tied in a practical bun and gentle eyes that showed genuine concern for each patient under her care. When Lisa saw Margaret's face for the first time, something familiar awakened in her memory, as if she were looking at a ghost from the past that had deeply marked her adolescence. "Wait a moment. I know this face from somewhere important in my life," Lisa murmured to herself, carefully studying Margaret's features. "Where have I seen this woman before? Why do I feel that she was very special to me at some point?" In the following hours, while meticulously caring for Margaret, checking her vital signs, administering medications, and adjusting the equipment that kept her alive, Lisa gradually began to remember specific details that confirmed her growing suspicions. 10 years ago, when Lisa was only 15 and her own mother was dying of cancer, in an overcrowded and resource-starved public hospital, a kind and attentive woman had appeared like a guardian angel in their lives, devastated by tragedy and despair. This woman, who worked as a cleaner at the hospital during the midnight shift, always found time to talk kindly with Lisa's mother, brought her small comforts like hot tea and homemade cookies, and offered words of encouragement when the doctors had no more hope to offer. Margaret had been that comforting and maternal presence who made the last months of Lisa's mother's life more dignified and less lonely, and now fate had placed the two women together again in completely different but equally dramatic circumstances. "My God, it is you. The woman who cared for my mother when I needed support and affection the most," Lisa exclaimed emotionally, gently holding Margaret's hand. "Now it's my turn to return all the kindness you showed us in those very difficult moments of our life." When Margaret finally awoke 3 days later, still weak and confused but out of immediate danger, Lisa was by her side, holding her hand with the same maternal care that Margaret had shown so many years ago. Margaret tried to speak, but her voice came out hoarse and almost inaudible due to days of intubation and heavy medications, so Lisa gently explained where she was, what had happened, and how a charitable neighbor had saved her life by finding her unconscious on the street during that rainy and desperate early morning. When Margaret weakly asked if anyone had called looking for her, if Alexander had tried to locate her, or shown any concern about her sudden disappearance, Lisa had to give the devastating news that no one had sought information about a missing elderly woman, and that she had remained an unidentified patient until she was able to provide her own personal information. The emotional pain of this revelation was almost as intense as the physical pain of the heart attack, and Margaret cried silently for hours, realizing that she had been completely abandoned by the son she raised with so much love and dedication. "No one asked about me? Not even a call or a visit in all these days?" Margaret asked with a voice broken by emotional pain. "How is it possible that my own son didn't miss me or worry about my well-being after throwing me out like that?" Lisa, moved by the same compassion that Margaret had shown years ago and by indignation at the cruelty of the situation, decided not only to professionally care for the patient, but also to offer a temporary home where Margaret could properly recover after being discharged. She lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, a simple but welcoming space that she had decorated with plants and family photographs, and insisted that Margaret stay in the guest room for as long as necessary for her complete recovery. When they were discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, with Margaret still very fragile but clinically stable, Lisa took her home and comfortably settled her in the room arranged with special care, providing all necessary medications and establishing a care routine that would ensure the gradual but consistent recovery of Margaret's physical and emotional health. During the first days in the apartment, Margaret remained mostly in bed, still emotionally processing the trauma of family abandonment, but gradually began to take interest in household activities and long conversations with Lisa about their respective lives and experiences. "Lisa, you barely know me and yet you're doing all this for me. How can I repay such kindness?" Margaret asked, watching the young woman prepare a medicinal tea. "You're giving me much more than a roof over my head. You're restoring my hope that good people still exist in this world." It was during one of these intimate and comforting conversations that Margaret discovered an extraordinary coincidence that would completely change the course of their lives. Lisa worked part-time as an administrative secretary in one of the offices that managed the financial and bureaucratic operations of Alexander's business empire. She had secured this additional job to supplement her income as a nurse and pay for the specialization courses she intended to take. And although she had no direct contact with Alexander, she had access to many documents, correspondence, and confidential information that circulated through the company's administrative departments. Lisa explained that she had always found strange the increasing volume of documentation related to sales and asset transfers that crossed her desk in recent weeks, especially considering that Alexander had a reputation for being extremely cautious and conservative in his important business decisions. Margaret felt her heart dangerously accelerate upon hearing this information, realizing that she might have found a way to discover what was really happening with her son's companies and who was behind the suspicious transactions she had discovered in those fateful documents. "You have access to documents and correspondence from Alexander's company. This could be the key to discovering the truth," Margaret exclaimed, feeling a spark of hope. "Perhaps we can understand what's really happening and protect my son from this trap before it's too late." In the following days, Lisa began paying special attention to the documents she processed at work, and soon discovered a disturbing pattern of communications between Victoria and representatives of a competing company known for aggressive and questionable business practices. The emails that passed through her desk revealed extremely detailed secret negotiations about the acquisition of various companies in Alexander's group at values significantly below market price, and most shocking was that Victoria was providing strategic, confidential information that only someone with intimate access to business secrets could know. Lisa also discovered that there was an offshore bank account in Victoria's name that was receiving substantial transfers from the purchasing company, clearly configuring a scheme of corruption and betrayal that would put Alexander at risk, not only financially but also legally, if authorities discovered his involuntary participation in these fraudulent transactions. When Lisa showed these evidences to Margaret, both were shocked by the depth of the betrayal and the sophistication of the scheme Victoria had architected to destroy Alexander while enriching herself at his expense. "Look at these emails, Margaret. Victoria is selling your son's companies for her own financial benefit." Lisa showed the printed documents with indignation. "She's not just a cruel wife. She's a calculating criminal who is systematically stealing the family's assets." While organizing the few belongings she had brought from the mansion, Margaret found in a side pocket of her suitcase a small portable storage device that she had completely forgotten she owned, an old device she used years ago to store important digitized documents when she still worked in administrative offices. Curious and with a strange feeling that it might be important, she asked Lisa to connect the device to the computer, and both were impressed to discover that it contained a detailed file of all documentation related to the sacrifices Margaret had made for Alexander over the years. There were digitized old medical reports proving her neglected heart condition, documents of the sale of land inherited from her parents, payment records from the 3 jobs she maintained simultaneously, receipts of Alexander's college tuition payments, and even photographs of her working exhaustively in different locations during all those years of unconditional maternal dedication. These documents were the concrete and irrefutable proof that Margaret had literally sacrificed everything, her health, her inheritance, her youth, and her own dreams, to ensure that Alexander would have the opportunities she never had. "My God, Margaret, you have here the proof of all the sacrifices you made for Alexander over decades," Lisa exclaimed, seeing the images and documents. This is more than enough evidence to show the entire world who you really are and what you've done for your family. Determined to discover the full extent of Victoria's betrayal, Margaret and Lisa decided to investigate more deeply the suspicious contacts and activities that appeared in the corporate emails. Using the research skills Lisa had developed during her nursing studies and Margaret's administrative experience, they managed to trace connections that revealed an even more complex and shocking network of corruption than they had initially imagined. They discovered that Victoria maintained a secret love affair with Charles, a senior executive at the competing company that was orchestrating the hostile takeover of Alexander's businesses, and that the two lovers had planned not only to steal the business assets, but also to marry after Victoria asked Alexander for divorce, once all the fraudulent transactions were completed. The plan was diabolically simple: financially destroy Alexander through forced sales, transfer the assets to accounts controlled by Charles and Victoria, and then abandon Alexander bankrupt and publicly humiliated, taking a stolen fortune to start a new luxurious life in another country where they could not be easily located by authorities. So Victoria isn't just stealing, she has a lover who is a partner in this criminal scheme, Margaret said with growing indignation. They plan to completely destroy my son to get rich at the expense of his work and dedication. While Margaret and Lisa worked feverishly to organize all the evidence they had collected and to develop a plan to publicly expose Victoria's criminal scheme before it was too late to save Alexander, they simultaneously received two devastating news items that transformed their mission of justice into a desperate race against time. First, Lisa discovered through her contacts at the office that Alexander had signed the preliminary documents for the sale of his main companies the previous afternoon, and that the final transaction would be concluded in exactly 24 hours, making the transfer of all his business assets to the conspirators irreversible. Almost at the same time, Margaret's phone rang with a call from the hospital where she had been treated, and the cardiologist urgently informed her that the follow-up tests showed her heart was rapidly failing due to complications from the previous heart attack and the intense emotional stress she had suffered, and that she would need to undergo emergency heart surgery in the next few hours to have any chance of long-term survival. "Margaret, we have only 24 hours to save your son from financial ruin, and your life is at risk too," Lisa said desperately. "How are we going to expose this entire criminal scheme and still take care of your health at the same time? Time is running out quickly." Margaret looked directly into Lisa's eyes with a determination that surprised them both, and with a firm voice despite her physical weakness, declared that she would postpone the urgent heart surgery to save Alexander from the financial and emotional ruin that Victoria had so cruelly orchestrated. Lisa tried to argue about the deadly risks of this decision, explaining that each hour lost drastically reduced Margaret's chances of survival, but the courageous mother remained inflexible in her maternal determination that overcame any instinct for self-preservation. She knew that this could be her last opportunity to protect her son from complete destruction, and she was willing to risk her own life to ensure that the truth was revealed before it was too late. Margaret called the hospital and informed them that she would postpone the procedure for 24 hours, completely ignoring the urgent protests of the cardiologist, who warned her about the potentially fatal consequences of this reckless but heroic decision. "Margaret, you could die if you don't have this surgery now. Your heart won't handle much more stress," Lisa begged, holding her friend's trembling hands. "It doesn't matter, Lisa. I would rather die trying to save my son than live knowing I could have prevented his destruction." Working feverishly throughout the night, Margaret and Lisa devised a bold plan to infiltrate the gala event that Alexander was organizing that same evening to celebrate what he thought was a prosperous expansion of his business, but which would actually be the final signature of his financial ruin. Lisa obtained uniforms from a catering company through a friend who worked in the events sector, and prepared Margaret with subtle makeup and a wig that would make her unrecognizable to guests who might remember her from the public humiliation she had suffered months earlier. They also carefully prepared a devastating audiovisual presentation, using all the documents, photographs, and evidence they had collected, chronologically organizing the story of Margaret's sacrifices and Victoria's systematic betrayal in a format that would be impossible to ignore or refute. Margaret, despite the constant pain in her chest and growing weakness, remained focused on the mission to save Alexander fueled by maternal adrenaline and the determination to deliver justice before her heart finally gave out. "Are you sure you can do this? The physical effort might be too much for your heart," Lisa asked worriedly, adjusting Margaret's uniform. "I endured decades of hard work with a sick heart, Lisa. I can endure one more night to save my son." The gala event was taking place in the main hall of Alexander's company headquarters, a luxurious environment decorated with expensive flowers, sparkling crystals, and elegant tables, where the most influential investors in the city gathered to celebrate what they thought was a brilliant business deal. Margaret and Lisa entered discreetly through the service entrance, blending in with the other catering staff, circulating and serving sophisticated drinks and refined canapés to the elegantly dressed guests. Margaret observed her son from a distance, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, animatedly conversing with the same investors who had witnessed her public humiliation months before, and felt her heart dangerously accelerate upon realizing how Alexander seemed genuinely happy and confident, completely oblivious to the betrayal that was about to be consummated. Victoria looked stunning in a golden gown, her jewelry gleaming under the hall lights, playing the role of the dedicated and proud wife while secretly preparing to execute the final blow that would destroy everything Alexander had built. "Look at how she's playing the role of the perfect wife, knowing that in a few hours she will have stolen everything from him," Margaret murmured to Lisa, discreetly serving drinks. "This will be the last time she manages to deceive my son. The truth always comes to light, no matter how long it takes." First, when the moment arrived for Alexander's speech, officially announcing the business expansion that actually represented his ruin, Margaret discreetly signaled to Lisa, who had strategically positioned herself near the hall's audio-visual system. Alexander was on stage, microphone in hand, thanking the investors and his wife for their unconditional support, when suddenly all the lights went out, creating a moment of confusion and murmurs among the surprised guests. Then the main screen lit up, initially showing an old photograph of a young Margaret, working at one of her 3 jobs, with a simple but powerful caption, "This is the story of a mother who sacrificed everything for the son she loved." The silence in the hall was absolute as the presentation continued, methodically showing each document, each photograph, each proof of the heroic sacrifices Margaret had made for decades, including medical reports proving she had worked for years with a failing heart, risking her life daily to pay for Alexander's education. "What is happening? Who is doing this?" Victoria nervously shouted, trying to locate those responsible for the unexpected presentation. "Someone turn this off immediately. Don't allow them to continue this ridiculous performance." The presentation then dramatically changed tone, showing the irrefutable evidence of Victoria's betrayal. The emails exchanged with Charles, the illicit bank transfers, the audio recordings where she and her lover coldly discussed how they would destroy Alexander and flee with the stolen money. The guests were shocked to see the extent of the conspiracy, and many began filming with their cell phones, realizing they were witnessing a scandal that would be news in the country's major economic newspapers. Alexander was paralyzed on stage, the microphone falling from his trembling hands, as he watched his life being simultaneously destroyed and reconstructed on the giant screen before him. Victoria desperately tried to exit the hall, but the doors had already been discreetly blocked by security guards whom Lisa had previously alerted about the situation, and she found herself cornered in the center of the hall, exposed before hundreds of witnesses who now knew her true criminal nature. "This is a lie. Someone forged these documents to incriminate me," Victoria desperately shouted, trying to maintain the facade until the last moment. "Alexander, you're not going to believe these absurd accusations against your own wife, are you? They're trying to separate us." It was at this crucial moment that Margaret revealed herself, removing her wig and slowly walking through the hall toward the stage, each step costing her immense effort due to her deteriorating heart condition. The guests moved aside to clear a path, many recognizing her as the woman who had been falsely accused of theft months before, and whispers of surprise and admiration began to circulate among those present who finally understood the truth about that situation. Margaret climbed onto the stage with dignity, supporting herself on the railing to avoid collapsing, and looked Alexander directly in the eyes for the first time since the terrible night she had been expelled from the mansion. The emotion of the reunion, combined with the shock of the devastating revelations about his wife, was too much for Alexander to bear. He staggered backward, completely lost consciousness, and collapsed on the stage floor, fainting in front of hundreds of witnesses who were watching the most intense family drama of their lives. "My son, Alexander," Margaret cried, rushing to help him despite her own extreme physical weakness. "Someone call a doctor. Please, let him be all right. I cannot lose him now that he can finally know the truth." When Alexander finally regained consciousness a few minutes later, with Margaret holding his head in her lap as she used to do when he was a child, the first thing he saw were the loving and concerned eyes of the mother he had cruelly abandoned. Tears began to stream down his face as he slowly processed everything he had discovered. His mother's unimaginable sacrifices, his wife's calculated betrayal, and his own blindness that had almost cost everything that really mattered in his life. He tried to speak, to ask for forgiveness, to explain himself, but Margaret gently placed her finger on his lips and smiled with the same maternal tenderness she had always shown, even in the most difficult moments. In this moment of intense emotional reconciliation, Margaret's already fragile heart finally gave way under the weight of emotions and physical exertion, and she collapsed in her son's arms, suffering another heart attack even more severe than the previous one, while Alexander desperately screamed for medical help. "Mother, forgive me for everything I did to you. I should never have doubted the woman who gave me life," Alexander cried, holding Margaret. "Don't leave me now that I finally understand how much you love me. I need you with me to rebuild our family." There in the ambulance, rushing frantically toward the hospital, Margaret, even connected to emergency equipment and struggling to breathe, managed to hold Alexander's hand and smile weakly at the son she had recovered. With an almost inaudible voice but full of unconditional love, she uttered the words that summarized a lifetime of maternal sacrifices. "I would sell my inheritance 1,000 times for you, my son. Just don't sell yours for someone who doesn't deserve it." Alexander held his mother's hand firmly throughout the journey, promising that he would never again allow anyone to separate them, and vowing that he would do everything possible to make up for the years of pain and abandonment he had caused to the most important woman in his life. While Margaret was being quickly taken for emergency surgery, Victoria was being led handcuffed to the women's detention center, her perfect hair now disheveled, without makeup, wearing a prison uniform that contrasted drastically with the gala dresses she used to wear, while other inmates observed her with the contempt reserved for those who betray their own family. "Alexander, promise that you will forgive your old and stubborn mother. Promise that you will be happy, even if I can't stay here to see it," Margaret weakly murmured. "Don't talk like that, Mother. You're going to be fine, and we're going to recover all the lost time. I promise I'll take care of you for the rest of my life." 3 days after Margaret's successful surgery, Alexander visited Victoria in prison, carrying a folder with legal documents and an expression of cold determination that she had never seen before. Victoria, who had completely lost the artificial beauty she had always used as a weapon of manipulation, desperately begged for forgiveness, claiming she had been influenced by Charles and that she still genuinely loved Alexander. But Alexander, now fully aware of the depth of betrayal and manipulation he had suffered, simply placed the divorce papers on the visiting room table and coldly informed her that all the secret accounts she maintained had been discovered and confiscated by the authorities, and that Charles had fled the country without a trace, completely abandoning her. Victoria attempted one last emotional manipulation, feigning fragility and remorse, but Alexander remained unmoved by the performance, remembering all the times she had humiliated his mother in the same calculated and cruel manner. "Alexander, please, give me a second chance. I can change, I can be a better wife. Don't abandon me here," Victoria pathetically pleaded. "You stole the only treasure I had, my mother. Now discover what it's like to lose everything of real value in life." 1 week later, Alexander visited Margaret in the hospital, bringing official documents showing that Victoria had been formally convicted of business fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, and that he had managed to cancel all fraudulent sales of his companies, completely recovering his assets through an intense but victorious legal battle. Margaret, now recovered from surgery and with her heart functioning properly for the first time in decades, thanks to appropriate medical care, cried with joy upon learning that her son was safe and that her struggle had not been in vain. Alexander then revealed the most important project of his life. He had created a foundation dedicated to helping single mothers facing difficulties similar to those Margaret had faced, offering education, medical care, and financial support so they could care for their children without sacrificing their own health and dignity. The foundation would be chaired by Margaret, who would finally have the opportunity to transform her own suffering into hope and support for other courageous women. Mother, I want you to chair this foundation and help other mothers who are going through what you went through, Alexander said, showing her the documents. I want your example of love and sacrifice to inspire other families to value what truly matters in life. 6 months later, Margaret was sitting in the renovated mansion garden, patiently guiding the staff on planting fruit trees that would provide shade and food for generations to come, while Alexander worked smiling on the porch, managing his businesses with a completely new perspective on what constituted true success in life. The golden plaque at the entrance of the foundation shone under the morning sun, proudly displaying the name chosen by both, Mother's Heart Foundation, because the true family treasure is not kept in vaults. Margaret had found not only justice and reconciliation with her son, but also a new purpose that gave meaning to all the years of struggle and sacrifice she had faced. Meanwhile, in a distant, cold cell at the women's detention center, Victoria observed through the small barred window a world to which she no longer belonged, holding a small, worn newspaper clipping showing Alexander and Margaret at the triumphant inauguration of the foundation, her tears of late repentance falling on the prisoner's clothes that now constituted her entire wardrobe. Look, Alexander, the first families are already benefiting from the foundation. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, Margaret said, watching children playing in the garden. Mother, everything good I am I learned from you. Now it's our turn to give back to the world all the kindness we've received from life. Did you enjoy Margaret and Alexander's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you. Sir, will you buy my brother? He is going to die, said a little beggar girl to a millionaire who ignored her. Days later, the millionaire was shocked to discover what had happened to them. The dark sky poured a relentless rain over the city, as if even the heavens were crying for the fate of Piper and her little brother Jasper. Since losing their parents, the streets had become their only home, a cruel and indifferent place for two children alone in the world. Piper, with her dark hair stuck to her face by the rain, carried Jasper in her thin arms, feeling the abnormal heat emanating from her brother's fragile body. Her large brown eyes were red from crying, but she couldn't give up. She was the only person Jasper had in the world. Hold on just a little longer, Jasper, she whispered against her brother's wet hair, feeling his chest rise and fall with difficulty with each breath. I promise, I'll get help. The rain fell harder and harder, making Piper seek shelter under the awning of a closed shop. Her clothes, a faded dress torn at the edges, were soaked and heavy. Jasper coughed violently in her arms, a sound that tore at his sister's heart. Each cough seemed to tear away a piece of the boy's life force. His round face, normally cheerful and smiling, was now pale and downcast, with lips almost blue from cold. The fever that had been consuming him for days now seemed to boil his little body, and Piper didn't know what else to do. People passed quickly on the sidewalk, some with umbrellas, others protecting themselves as best they could from the storm. But none even glanced at the two abandoned children. Please, sir. Mom. Someone. Piper tried to get the attention of passers-by, her voice almost disappearing in the noise of the rain. My brother is sick. We need help. Desperation grew inside Piper like a dark wave. For days, Jasper had been getting worse, his cough becoming deeper, his fever higher, and now he could barely keep his eyes open. She had tried everything. Wet cloths on his forehead to bring down the fever, teas made with herbs she could find, even lullabies her mother used to sing. Nothing worked. With each passing hour, Jasper grew weaker, more distant. Piper looked around, tears mixing with the rain streaming down her face. The city lights shone in the distance, cruel in their indifference, while Jasper trembled violently in her arms, his small body fighting against the disease consuming him. "I won't let you go," promised Piper, pressing Jasper against her chest, as if she could transfer her own strength to him. "You're all I have in this world." It was then that Piper saw through the curtain of rain a long gleaming car stopping in front of an illuminated restaurant across the street. The restaurant light seemed warm and welcoming, a cruel contrast to the cold darkness where she and Jasper found themselves. From the car emerged a tall man, dressed in elegant clothes and protected by an umbrella held by another man in a dark suit. Something in the first man's posture, in the way people around seemed to notice him, told Piper he was important, that he had power, that he could be the answer to her prayers. With Jasper firmly in her arms, she gathered the last of her strength and ran across the street, ignoring the cars that honked and braked sharply. "It's our last hope," thought Piper, feeling Jasper's weight increase with each step. "It has to work." The man was Sterling, known in the city for his business empire and calculating coldness. His angular, well-shaven face showed no emotion as he prepared to enter the restaurant, where a business dinner awaited him. For him, that night was just another in his routine of accumulating power and wealth, indifferent to the storm punishing the less fortunate. Piper managed to reach him before he entered, her little legs trembling with exhaustion, her heart beating erratically in her chest. She stopped before him, a small, drenched figure carrying a precious burden that seemed too large for her fragile arms. "Sir, please." Her voice was trembling but determined. "You look like an important person. Can you help us?" Sterling looked down and saw the soaked girl, hair stuck to her face, eyes pleading, and the small body of the boy in her arms, notably motionless except for occasional tremors and difficult breathing. For a moment, just a brief instant, something seemed to change in his eyes. A distant memory, perhaps, a momentary human connection. Whatever it was, it quickly disappeared, replaced by impatience and irritation. He had an important dinner, important people to impress, profitable business to close. He had no time to get involved with the problems of two street children. His bodyguard stepped forward, as if to push Piper away, but she stood firm, determination shining in her feverish eyes. "Sir, by my brother? He's going to die." The words came out of her mouth in an act of pure desperation. "I'll wash your house, tend to your garden, do anything. I just need money for his medicine." Piper's words hung in the air between them, laden with a desperation that Sterling chose to ignore. He looked at her not as a child desperately in need of help, but as an annoyance, an unwanted stain on his perfect evening. His cold eyes scanned Piper's small, wet figure and Jasper's almost lifeless body in her arms. For a moment, she thought she saw something, compassion perhaps, cross his face, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of disdain. Sterling adjusted the cuff of his expensive shirt and looked at his gold watch, as if the time spent looking at the children was already too much of a waste. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, soaking Piper and Jasper even more, while Sterling remained protected under the umbrella held by his bodyguard. "Get out of my way," he finally said, with a voice as cold as the falling rain. "There are institutions for people like you. Don't bother me." Piper's heart sank at hearing the cruel words. Every day on the streets she had faced rejection and indifference, but something in Sterling's calculated coldness wounded her deeply. How could someone look at a dying child and simply not care? She stepped forward, determined to try once more, but Sterling's bodyguard moved with surprising quickness. The bodyguard made a move to push her away, and Piper lost her balance on the wet sidewalk, desperately trying to protect Jasper as she fell. Time seemed to slow down as she fell backward, feeling Jasper's weight slip from her arms. The impact with the ground was painful, but nothing compared to the pain of seeing her brother falling into a large puddle of dirty water at the edge of the street, his small body producing a splash that made the water soil his already wet clothes even more. "Jasper!" Piper screamed, her voice tearing through the night air. "No, please, no!" Time froze in that terrible moment. Piper, fallen on the wet ground, saw Sterling turn his back on her without even a glance to check if the children were okay. He entered the restaurant with firm steps, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just ignored a child's desperate plea to save her brother's life. The bodyguard followed him, closing the umbrella and letting the raindrops fall on the red carpet at the restaurant entrance. The elegant doors closed behind them, isolating Sterling's comfortable and luxurious world from the desperation he had left behind. Piper dragged herself across the wet sidewalk, ignoring the pain in her scraped knees and elbows from the fall. All that mattered was reaching Jasper, who lay motionless in the puddle of water, his skin now paler than ever against the darkness of the rainy night. "Jasper, please wake up," Piper begged, finally reaching her brother and pulling him out of the water. "Jasper, don't leave me alone in this world. Please, talk to me." With trembling hands, Piper lifted Jasper's body, feeling his dead weight in her arms. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from her chest. Jasper's face was completely pale. His lips had a frightening bluish coloration. She shook him gently, then more forcefully calling his name between desperate sobs. The rain continued to fall relentlessly upon the two, as if the universe was indifferent to the drama unfolding on that dark sidewalk. Piper pressed her ear against her brother's chest, trying to hear his heartbeat through the noise of the storm. For a terrible moment, she couldn't hear anything, and an anguished cry escaped her throat. Then, almost imperceptible, a weak movement of Jasper's chest, a breath so shallow it was barely noticeable. "He's alive." "He's still alive," she murmured, tears of relief mixing with those of the rain. But for how much longer? The question hung in the air unanswered, as Piper looked desperately around, seeking help, some sign of hope. Through the restaurant windows, she could see Sterling sitting comfortably, laughing and talking with other well-dressed people, completely oblivious to the drama happening outside. The contrast was too painful to bear. Inside, warmth, food, comfort, indifference; outside, cold, hunger, despair, brotherly love. With a determination born of the purest desperation, Piper lifted Jasper once again in her arms. He was heavier now, his consciousness completely absent, his body surrendered to the disease that was consuming him. But Piper couldn't give up, would not give up. With Jasper in her arms, she began to walk down the street, her legs faltering with each step, the rain punishing their fragile bodies. Where she was going, she wasn't exactly sure. She only knew she needed to find help before it was too late. "I'll save you, Jasper," she promised, her words almost inaudible under the storm. "Even if it's the last thing I do in this life." The city lights shone in the distance, distorted by the curtain of rain, as Piper stumbled down the street with Jasper in her arms. Her small body faced the immense effort of carrying her brother, but her will was much greater than her physical strength. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, against the despair that threatened to consume her. Jasper now responded to no stimulus. His body was completely inert, as if he had already given up fighting. But Piper refused to accept this possibility. In her mind flashed memories of better days. Jasper laughing as he ran through the park, his eyes shining when they got a piece of fresh bread, the way he always smiled even in the most difficult moments. These fragments of happiness amid misery were what gave Piper strength to continue, to face one more step, one more second in that desperate fight for her brother's life. "Remember when Mom used to sing us to sleep?" she whispered to Jasper, as if he could hear her. "I'll sing to you when we're safe, I promise. Just don't go away, please." Jasper's silence was the most terrifying response Piper could receive. He always responded, always had a kind word or a smile for her. Now only silence and a breath so weak it seemed almost non-existent. A few meters ahead, Piper spotted the lights of a public hospital, a beacon of hope in the storm that was her life. With the last strength she could gather, she quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her muscles, the exhaustion that took over every inch of her body. The hospital entrance seemed to be miles away, though in reality it was only a few meters. Each step was a battle, each breath a struggle. When she finally reached the glass doors of the emergency room, her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees on the cold floor, still holding Jasper with all the strength she had left. "Help, please," she shouted with what remained of her voice. "My brother. He's not breathing. Please, someone help." The fluorescent lights of the hospital illuminated the faces of the two children like a cruel spotlight, revealing the full extent of the despair in which they found themselves. Piper's face was contorted with pain and worry, her eyes begging for help from anyone who looked in her direction. Jasper, in contrast, seemed strangely at peace, his face motionless, expressionless, as if he were already far away. A security guard approached, initially with a stern expression, ready to expel 2 more beggars seeking shelter from the rain. But something in Piper's gaze, in Jasper's frightening immobility, made him hesitate. A nurse passed by hurriedly, but stopped immediately upon seeing the children. Piper felt gentle hands trying to take Jasper from her arms, but she instinctively resisted, clinging to her brother as if her own life depended on it. "He's all I have," she murmured between sobs, reluctant to release Jasper even to those who could help him. "Please save him. He's just a child. He deserves to live." The waiting room of the public hospital buzzed with activity, even at that hour of the night. People moaned in worn plastic chairs, some coughing, others holding injured limbs, all with expressions of pain and anxiety. The air carried a strong smell of disinfectant, mixed with the unmistakable odor of disease and despair. Piper remained kneeling at the entrance, soaked by the rain that still dripped from her clothes and hair, forming a small puddle on the linoleum floor. Jasper remained motionless in her arms, his chest rising and falling at increasingly long and worrying intervals. A security guard in a dark blue uniform approached quickly, his face hardened by the routine of dealing with difficult situations night after night. "Girl, you can't stay here. Where are your parents?" "Unaccompanied children cannot enter without a responsible adult," he said in a firm voice, but not completely devoid of compassion. "This is not a place for street children looking for shelter from the rain." Piper raised her face marked by tears, her eyes conveying a desperation that words could not express. She hugged Jasper tighter, as if fearing someone might tear him from her arms, the only family she had left in the world. The hospital's fluorescent lights seemed merciless, revealing Jasper's extreme pallor and his lips that were already turning purple. Every passing second was precious. Every moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Piper took a deep breath, gathering strength she didn't know she still possessed. "Please, sir, my brother is very sick. He's dying," Piper begged, her voice choked with tears and exhaustion. "I have no one else in the world besides him. If you send us away, he'll die out there alone in the rain. Please have mercy." The security guard hesitated, his gaze alternating between the rules he should follow and the obvious emergency before him. His expression softened a bit upon seeing the boy's critical condition, but years of work had taught him to follow protocols. He opened his mouth to respond when a middle-aged nurse hurriedly passed through the corridor. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the scene, a soaked girl holding an almost unconscious boy, begging for help while the security guard seemed about to send them away. The nurse approached quickly, her experienced eyes assessing the situation in seconds. She knelt beside Piper, ignoring the water soaking her white uniform, and touched Jasper's forehead, withdrawing her hand almost immediately, alarmed by the intense heat emanating from the small body. "This boy needs urgent care," she declared, already signaling to other staff members. "The fever is extremely high and his breathing is compromised. We need to take him to emergency right now." Everything happened very quickly after that. Jasper was placed on a stretcher by gentle but efficient hands, while Piper tried to keep up, her legs stumbling with fatigue. The medical team moved urgently through the corridors, the stretcher sliding rapidly across the floor, while medical terms that Piper didn't understand were exchanged over her brother's motionless body. For a terrible moment, she feared they would separate them, that they would leave her behind while taking Jasper away, but the nurse who had interceded held her hand, allowing her to accompany her brother. A room with equipment was quickly reached, and Jasper was transferred to a bed, surrounded by beeping machines and doctors speaking rapidly. Piper was kept at the door, watching with eyes widened by fear as they connected tubes and wires to her brother's small body. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Are they hurting him? Why are they putting all those things on him? Piper asked the nurse, her hands squeezing the wet fabric of her dress. "He looks so small amid all those machines. He'll be all right, won't he?" After what seemed like an eternity, but was only a few minutes of intense medical activity, a grey-haired doctor with a compassionate look approached Piper. Her badge identified her as Dr. Sinclair. She bent down to be at Piper's eye level, a kindness the girl rarely experienced from adults. The doctor had wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of years of service, of lives saved and lost, of battles against time and disease. Her hands, when they held Piper's, were firm and warm. "Your brother is very sick, little one," said Dr. Sinclair, her voice gentle but not hiding the gravity of the situation. "He has severe pneumonia, a serious infection in his lungs. We're doing everything we can, but he needs a specific medication that unfortunately we don't have available here. Without this medication in the next few hours, I don't know if he'll be able to resist. The infection is very aggressive, and his body is already weakened by exposure and malnutrition." The words hit Piper like physical blows, each one more painful than the last. Pneumonia, specific medication, not available. Don't know if he'll resist. The room seemed to spin around her, the lights becoming brighter and then darker, as she struggled to process what she was hearing. Her childish mind, already overwhelmed by months of surviving on the streets and the premature responsibility of caring for her brother, desperately tried to find a solution, a way out of this nightmare. Dr. Sinclair continued talking, explaining about antibiotics, resistance, hospital pharmacies, but all Piper could understand was that her brother would die if she couldn't get that medication. "How much does this medicine cost, doctor?" "I can work to get the money," offered Piper, determination shining through her fatigue. "I can clean the entire hospital. I can take care of other patients. I can do anything. Just tell me how much I need to get to save my brother." The doctor hesitated, clearly moved by the courage of the little girl before her. She explained that the medication cost more than Piper could earn in months of work, even if it were legal to employ a child her age. She informed her that they would try to contact other health facilities to check the availability of the medicine, but they couldn't promise anything. Meanwhile, they would do their best with the available resources. Piper was led back to the waiting room after the nurse helped her dry off a bit with paper towels and offered her hot tea to warm her trembling body. Now alone amidst the crowd of sick and injured people, Piper felt the weight of the world on her small shoulders. The tea cooled untouched between her hands, while her mind worked frantically, seeking an impossible solution. "I won't let you die, Jasper," she muttered to herself like a solemn promise. "I'll find a way to get this medicine, even if I have to cross the entire city under this storm. I promised our parents I would take care of you, and that's what I'll do until my last breath." While Piper sank into desperate thoughts, a sudden movement caught her attention. An elderly lady, with white hair tied in a simple bun and modest but clean clothes, was getting up from a nearby chair, leaning on a wooden cane. As she tried to grab her purse, the lady lost her balance for a moment and the purse fell, spilling its contents on the floor. Instinctively, even amid her own despair, Piper stood up to help. Years living on the streets had not hardened her heart or erased the lessons of kindness her parents had taught her. She knelt down and began collecting the lady's belongings: an embroidered handkerchief, a small prayer book, some medicines, and a leather wallet worn with use. "Let me help you, ma'am," Piper offered, gathering the objects carefully. "You shouldn't bend down like that with your cane. You could fall and hurt yourself." The wallet had opened when it fell, and Piper saw several bills inside, more money than she had seen together in a long time. For an instant, just a fleeting moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind. That money could buy Jasper's medicine. Nobody would need to know. It would be so easy to slip a few bills into the pocket of her damp dress. The idea made her pause for a second, her heart racing with the possibility of saving her brother, even if it meant doing something her parents would have disapproved of. But as quickly as it came, the thought was rejected. Piper closed the wallet without touching the money and handed it to the lady along with the other belongings, ignoring the desperate voice inside her that screamed, this might be Jasper's only chance. "Thank you very much, dear." The lady thanked her, surprised by the unexpected kindness. Nowadays it's rare to find people willing to help, especially someone so young and clearly going through difficulties of her own. "You're all wet and look exhausted. What is a girl like you doing alone in the hospital at this hour of the night?" Something in the lady's gentle voice made Piper's defenses crumble. Perhaps it was the maternal tone that reminded her of her own mother. Perhaps it was simply the accumulation of hours of fear and despair, but Piper found herself telling the whole story: how she and Jasper had lost their parents, how they lived on the streets, how her brother had gradually fallen ill until reaching the critical state he was in now, how desperately she needed a medication she couldn't afford. The words came out in an emotional torrent, interrupted by occasional sobs that she tried to control. The lady listened in silence, her expression changing from surprise to deep compassion as Piper spoke. When the girl finally finished, the elderly woman had tears in her eyes. "You could have taken money from my wallet when it fell," the lady observed softly, with no accusation in her voice. "I saw how you looked at the money and hesitated. Many would have taken advantage of the opportunity, especially with such an urgent reason as saving a brother's life. But you chose to be honest, even in your moment of greatest need. That says a lot about your character, little one." Before Piper could respond, the lady opened her purse again and took out something that shone under the hospital lights, a small golden brooch with intricate details and a red stone in the center. It was clearly an old and valuable piece, the kind of object that would pass from generation to generation in a family. The lady held it for a moment, as if saying goodbye to an old friend, before extending it to Piper. "This brooch belonged to my grandmother, and before her to her mother's mother," explained the lady, placing the precious object in Piper's small, dirty hand. "It is the most valuable item I own, not just in money, but in memories. But memories don't save lives, and your brother needs it more than I do now. There's a pawn shop 2 blocks from here near the pharmacy on the corner. They should still be open, despite the hour. Sell this and buy the medicine for your brother. It's all I can do for you." Piper looked at the brooch in her hand, unable to believe the incomprehensible generosity of this stranger. The jewel captured the light and reflected it in small rainbows, as if it contained hope in its very structure. It was heavy, substantial, clearly valuable. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not of despair, but of gratitude so deep that it seemed to overflow from her small body. She tried to return the brooch, arguing that it was too precious, that she couldn't accept something so valuable from a stranger, but the lady gently closed Piper's fingers around the jewel. "A life is worth more than any material object, dear," the lady said firmly. "I've had a long life full of memories to cherish. Your brother deserves the chance to create his own. Go now, quickly, before the shop closes. And when your brother is better, remember to always extend your kindness to others, as you did to me today." With her heart overflowing with renewed hope, Piper thanked the lady with words broken by emotion and ran to the hospital exit. The rain had diminished somewhat, transforming into a persistent drizzle that still wet the streets and sidewalks. But Piper hardly noticed the moisture now. All her attention was focused on the mission of saving her brother. The brooch was safe in her closed hand, practically hidden to avoid drawing attention. The streets were almost deserted at that hour, just a few occasional cars passing quickly, their headlights creating ghostly glimmers in the puddles of water. Piper ran as fast as her tired legs allowed, mentally counting the steps to the pawn shop the lady had mentioned. "Just hold on a little longer, Jasper," she whispered as she ran, as if her brother could hear her across the distance. "I'm coming back with your medicine. We'll stay together as we promised. Just a little more fight, my brave little brother." Adrenaline propelled Piper forward, even when her muscles protested in pain. She could already see the pawn shop sign a block away, a yellowish neon light that blinked intermittently in the rainy night. So focused was she on her goal that she didn't notice the 2 figures that emerged from a dark alley and began following her. Only when she was a few meters from the store did Piper notice the quick footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw 2 teenagers approaching, their predatory expressions visible even in the semi-darkness of the poorly lit street. One of them, the taller one, had a cut on his eyebrow and a malicious smile that made Piper freeze in fear. The other was smaller, but his eyes had a calculating coldness that she immediately recognized. They were eyes that had seen too much, too young, eyes that belonged to someone who had learned to survive at the expense of others. "Hey, kid, what do you have there in your hand that you're holding so carefully?" asked the taller one, moving even closer. "We saw you leaving the hospital as if you'd won the lottery. Must be something valuable, right? Why not share with your friends from the street?" Fear took hold of Piper, a fear different from what she had felt for Jasper. This was a primordial, instinctive fear, the kind of fear that makes your heart race and your mouth dry. She knew boys like these, knew the harsh rules of life on the streets. They were older and bigger, and Piper knew the dangers she faced alone on the streets at night. But the thought of Jasper, lying in that hospital bed, fighting for each breath, gave Piper a courage she didn't know she possessed. She gripped the brooch more tightly in her hand and took a step back, her eyes frantically searching for an escape route. "I have nothing for you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "Please, let me pass. My brother is very sick. I need to get to the store before it closes. It's an emergency." Her words fell on deaf ears. The boys exchanged a quick glance and advanced simultaneously, one blocking Piper's path to the pawn shop, the other positioning himself behind her, cutting off her escape route. The message was clear. They wouldn't let her pass without taking whatever she was hiding. Piper felt despair growing again. So close. She was so close to saving Jasper, only to be stopped just meters away from the solution. The injustice of the situation ignited something inside her, a fierce determination that surpassed even her fear. "It's to save my brother's life," she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty street. "He will die if I don't get the medicine. Please show some compassion. You must have loved someone too." For a moment it seemed her words had touched something in the teenagers. The smaller one hesitated, his gaze faltering briefly. But the taller one just laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that cut through the humid air like a knife. "I don't care about your brother, Pipsqueak," he replied, advancing another step. "It's every man for himself in this world. Now be a good girl and hand over what you've got in your hand, or we'll have to take it by force." Piper realized there was no diplomatic solution. They wouldn't be moved, wouldn't back down. In an impulsive decision born of pure desperation, she pretended to try to pass by the smaller boy, only to change direction at the last moment and run with all her speed toward the street. It was a risky maneuver, but the surprise worked for a crucial instant. Piper ran as she had never run before, her feet barely touching the wet ground, the brooch clutched in her hand as if it were Jasper's heart itself. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the teenagers behind her, their curses echoing in the night. She was almost reaching the other side of the street when she felt fingers grab her dress, pulling her back. "You're not going anywhere with our merchandise," growled the larger boy, pulling Piper forcefully. In a desperate struggle, Piper tried to break free, kicking and twisting with a strength born of pure survival instinct, not for herself, but for Jasper. Her fingers closed even more tightly around the brooch, her nails digging into her own palm. The fight lasted only seconds, but it seemed an eternity. In a final movement to free herself, Piper managed to tear her dress from the aggressor's hands, but the momentum made her stumble and fall forward directly onto the wet street. That's when she heard the sound, the roar of an engine approaching rapidly, followed by the sharp screech of tires trying to brake on wet asphalt. Piper turned toward the sound, only to be blinded by the bright lights of headlights rapidly approaching. "Jasper, forgive me," was her only thought as the car came toward her, seemingly unable to stop in time. "I tried, little brother." "I swear I tried until the end." The surgical center of the hospital was an almost sacred space where life and death waged their most intense battles. The white, merciless lights revealed every detail of Piper's small, fragile body, now unconscious on the operating table. The medical team moved with urgent precision around her, their tense expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. The impact of the accident had been serious. Piper suffered severe injuries and was unconscious. The medical team worked intensely to stabilize her, forming a painful contrast with the extreme pallor of her skin. Monitors beeped around her, measuring each weak beat of her heart, each breath assisted by life support equipment. Outside the room, through the observation window, an elegantly dressed man watched the scene with eyes wide with horror. Sterling, still wearing the same expensive suit from the business dinner, now stained with Piper's blood. "How could I do this? How could I ignore a child begging for help and now be responsible for almost killing her?" he muttered to himself, hands pressed against the glass as if wanting to pass through it. "What kind of monster have I become?" The chief surgeon worked feverishly to contain the bleeding in Piper's brain, his precise movements contrasting with the urgency of the situation. Every second was precious. Every moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The heart monitor recorded increasingly weak beats, an alarming sign that the girl's small body was losing the battle. A nurse new to the team noticed something strange. Even unconscious under the effect of powerful sedatives, Piper kept her right hand firmly closed, her pale fingers contracted as if in a last desperate attempt to hold on to something important. The nurse gently tried to open the girl's fingers, thinking she might be holding something that needed to be removed before the operation could continue, but found surprising resistance. It was as if, even on the brink of death, Piper refused to let go of the object she was holding. "She won't let go, doctor," the nurse reported, concerned. "Her fingers are so tightly closed that I fear hurting her if I force them. I've never seen anything like this before, especially in someone so young and in such serious condition." Outside the operating room, Sterling paced back and forth, a figure tormented by the weight of guilt. His driver, a middle-aged man who had served him for years, remained a few steps behind, equally shaken by the accident. Everything had happened so quickly. The girl suddenly appearing in front of the car, the desperate attempt to brake, the horrible sound of impact. But what truly tormented Sterling wasn't just the accident itself, but the recognition. The moment he saw the small body on the wet asphalt, he recognized her immediately. The same girl who had begged for his help hours before, the same child he had dismissed with disdain, as if she were merely an inconvenience in his perfect day. The universe, in its cruel irony, had placed her life in his hands not once but twice in the same day, and both times he had failed terribly. Seeing that the girl was still breathing after the impact, Sterling had immediately ordered his driver to take them to the best hospital in the city, not the public hospital where accident victims would normally be sent, but the private clinic where the elite of society received exclusive care. "We have to do more than just save her," Sterling told his driver, his voice choked with an emotion he rarely displayed. "I have to fix what I did. And I'm not just talking about the accident, but what happened before when I could have helped and chose to do nothing." While doctors fought to keep Piper alive in another room in another hospital, the public hospital that Piper had left to seek medication for her brother, Jasper was fighting his own battle against death. His small body, already weakened by days of fever and poor nutrition, was losing the ability to combat the infection consuming his lungs. Dr. Sinclair observed the monitors with growing concern, noting how the oxygen saturation gradually decreased, how the fever refused to yield even with the available medications. It was a battle she had seen many times in her career. Poor children arriving too late for treatment, without resources for essential medications, without families able to help. Usually these stories ended in the same tragic way, but something about Jasper and his dedicated sister had deeply touched the experienced doctor. She had done everything to obtain the necessary medication, contacting other health units, begging the hospital administration, but without success. Now all that remained was to wait and hope that Jasper's young body would find strength where there seemed to be none. "Where is your sister, little one?" whispered the doctor, adjusting the oxygen feeding into Jasper's nostrils. "She promised to come back to you, and I've never seen such determination in someone so young. Hold on a little longer." Back at the elite hospital, an administrative nurse approached Sterling with a clipboard in hand, her face a mask of professionalism that barely hid the curiosity about why one of the richest and most powerful men in the city was so devastated by an accident with a street girl. She needed information for the hospital record, but all they knew was that the patient's name was Piper. No surname, no documents, no formal registration in the system. Sterling looked at the clipboard almost in a trance, as if the questions there were written in a language he could no longer understand. How could he fill in the gaps of a child's life that he didn't know, that he had ignored when she needed him most? It was then that the nurse, perhaps moved by compassion or perhaps just following protocol, mentioned something that changed everything, the object that the girl was holding so tightly. "We've identified what she's holding so firmly," the nurse informed. "It's an antique brooch, apparently valuable. The doctor believes it may have sentimental value, since she won't release it even while unconscious. Perhaps it belongs to her family." The mention of the brooch sparked Sterling's curiosity. Why would a street child be clutching a valuable object with such determination, especially when she was literally running for her life? He asked to see the object, but was informed that this would be impossible without hurting the patient. Determined to better understand the situation, Sterling began questioning the medical team, the paramedics who had first arrived at the scene, anyone who might have information about Piper. It was then that one of the doctors casually mentioned that before losing consciousness completely during transport, Piper had repeatedly mumbled about her brother, about a medicine, about how she needed to reach the pawn shop before it closed. The pieces started to fall into place in Sterling's mind. The desperate plea earlier that day, the mention of a sick brother needing medication, the valuable brooch, the frantic run through the rainy street. "My God!" exclaimed Sterling, the realization hitting him like a punch to the stomach. She was trying to sell the brooch to buy medicine for her brother. She was running to save his life when my car hit her. The guilt already consuming Sterling intensified tenfold. It wasn't enough that he had ignored a desperate child's plea for help. Now he had been directly responsible for preventing her from saving her brother. 2 young, innocent lives were hanging by a thread because of his indifference, his selfishness, his lack of basic humanity. With a determination born of guilt and remorse, Sterling grabbed his phone and began making calls, using all his power and influence to locate Piper's brother. It didn't take long. The world of the privileged has its advantages, and he soon discovered that a boy named Jasper had been admitted to the public hospital with severe pneumonia, urgently needing a specific and expensive medication that wasn't available at that facility. The boy was rapidly deteriorating, with increasingly slim chances of survival without proper treatment. "Send the best pediatric pneumonia specialist immediately to the public hospital," Sterling ordered his assistant over the phone. "Buy all available stock of that medication regardless of price, and prepare to transfer the boy here as soon as he's stable enough to be moved. These children will not die today, not because of me. Spare no expense, understood? No cost is too high." Inside the operating room, the battle for Piper's life reached its most critical moment. The trauma to her brain had caused dangerous swelling, increasing intracranial pressure to alarming levels. The doctors had done everything within their power, drained the accumulated blood, administered medications to reduce swelling, stabilized secondary fractures. Now it was a matter of waiting and watching, of hoping the young body would respond to treatment. But the signs weren't promising. The heart monitor showed increasingly weak and irregular beats. Blood pressure was gradually falling, oxygenation decreasing despite maximum support. The medical team exchanged worried glances, mentally preparing for the worst. Even in the best hospitals, with the best doctors and equipment, there are limits to what medicine can do. Sometimes the damage is simply too great, life too fragile. "We are losing her," announced the chief surgeon, his voice calm but tense beneath the surgical mask. "Prepare resuscitation protocol. I want a unit of blood ready and epinephrine available immediately." Outside the room, Sterling watched with growing horror, witnessing Piper's life literally slipping away before his eyes. The nurses moved more quickly now, bringing additional equipment into the room, preparing for the moment when the girl's heart would completely stop. That's when he noticed something strange. Amid all the tension and movement, Piper's closed hand began to relax slightly, as if she was finally ready to release the brooch she had protected with such determination. It was as if, even unconscious, she somehow knew that her mission had been transferred to other hands, that her brother was no longer alone in the fight for survival. This small gesture, this silent surrender, hit Sterling in a way that no words could. Tears flowed freely down his face, something that hadn't happened since his distant childhood. "Don't give up, Piper," he murmured, his words directed at the girl who couldn't hear him. "Your brother needs you, and I need the chance to fix what I've done. Please, fight a little longer." Meanwhile, at the public hospital, Jasper's situation took a sudden and dramatic turn. The team of specialists sent by Sterling had arrived with impressive speed, bringing not only the necessary medication, but also advanced equipment and expertise that were rarely available in that public facility. Dr. Sinclair watched with a mixture of surprise and relief as the new treatment was administered, as more modern monitors were installed, as her small patient finally received the care he deserved from the beginning. But her mind was divided between relief for Jasper's chance and concern for Piper, who had not returned as promised. Where was the girl who had demonstrated such courage and determination? Had she gotten the money for the medicine? Had she encountered difficulties in the dangerous streets at night? The doctor had no answers, only a disturbing feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Who sent you? Who is paying for all this? Dr. Sinclair asked the specialist doctor who led the new team. I've been working at this hospital for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this, especially for a child without resources or influential family. In the operating room, Piper's condition worsened. The monitors indicated that her heart had stopped beating, and the medical team immediately initiated emergency procedures. The medical team acted quickly, starting all the necessary procedures to try to revive Piper. Each professional knew exactly what to do in that critical situation. It was a choreographed dance of precise movements, each team member knowing exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Sterling watched through the window, his eyes fixed on the monitor that showed the flat line, the absence of life where before there had been at least a weak pulse. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes into an eternity of suspense and despair. Time was running against Piper. After 4 minutes without oxygenation, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. After 10 minutes, the chances of recovery are practically nil. Continue compressions, ordered the chief surgeon, his forehead now covered with sweat despite the refrigerated environment. This patient is young and previously healthy. Let's give her every possible chance. The medical team worked tirelessly, taking turns with chest compressions to maintain constant strength and rhythm. Medication after medication was administered. Increasingly aggressive techniques were attempted, but the monitor continued to show that devastating straight line. After 15 minutes of intense efforts, the chief surgeon looked at the clock, then at the monitor and finally at his exhausted team. There were rules, protocols, medical realities that could not be ignored. There came a moment when persisting was no longer responsible medicine, but rather the refusal to accept the inevitable. With a deep and painful sigh, he lowered his hands, signaling for the team to stop compressions. Time of death, he began, his voice heavy with the defeat that never became easier, no matter how many times it was experienced. That's when it happened. So subtle at first that no one noticed, then unmistakable. A small spike appeared on the cardiac monitor, followed by another and another. Weak, irregular, but definitely present. The flat line had been replaced by a series of undulations indicating a heart struggling to return to life. The team looked in silence for a moment, almost afraid to believe before going into renewed action, now with the goal of stabilizing and strengthening this fragile return. Outside, Sterling fell to his knees, his normally impeccable posture completely forgotten, as he whispered words of gratitude to a God he hadn't believed in for years. It was a medical miracle, or perhaps something deeper. The physical manifestation of the same fierce determination that had kept Piper fighting for her brother against all obstacles. "She's coming back," exclaimed a nurse, her voice breaking the tense silence of the room. "We have heart rhythm, weak but present, pressure slowly rising. This girl is a fighter." While the team worked to stabilize Piper, Sterling received news from the public hospital. The medication was taking effect, and Jasper was showing the first signs of improvement. His oxygen saturation was rising, the fever finally beginning to subside, his lungs responding to the aggressive treatment. It was too early to declare victory, the doctors warned. The boy was still very sick, still facing a long road to complete recovery. But for the first time since he had been admitted, there was real, tangible hope. The scale that had previously tipped heavily toward death now began to slowly tilt in the direction of life. Sterling felt a relief so profound it nearly choked him. One of the two young people for whom he was responsible seemed to be emerging from immediate danger. Now everything depended on Piper continuing her own fight, on her traumatized brain having been spared permanent damage, on her indomitable spirit remaining intact through the physical trauma. Mr. Sterling called a doctor, approaching with a grave expression. "We've managed to stabilize the girl for now, but I need to be honest. The situation is still extremely critical. The cranial trauma is severe, and we still don't know the extent of the brain damage. The next 24 hours will be decisive." The doctor continued explaining the situation in technical terms that Sterling barely understood, talking about intracranial pressure, diffuse axonal injury, cerebral contusions. But the businessman grasped the essentials. Piper had survived the impossible, had literally come back from death, but her battle was far from over. She would remain in a medically induced coma for the next few days to give her brain the best chance of recovery. There were no guarantees. She could wake up perfectly fine, could have permanent sequelae, or might never wake up. It was a torturous wait that no money or power could shorten. For the first time in his adult life, Sterling faced a situation he could not control, manipulate, or buy a solution for. "I will do everything in my power to save these children," Sterling told the doctor, his voice finding renewed firmness. "Any specialist, any experimental treatment, any medical center in the world, regardless of cost. And meanwhile, I want to know more about them. How they ended up on the streets, what happened to their parents, how I can help them beyond immediate medical care." In the hours that followed, while Piper remained stabilized but critical, and Jasper slowly responded to treatment, Sterling used his contacts and resources to discover the children's story. What he learned only increased his feelings of guilt and responsibility. Piper and Jasper's parents had died in a fire a few months earlier, leaving the children completely alone in the world. Without relatives who could or would care for them, without resources to support themselves, they had ended up on the streets, surviving on small occasional jobs and the reluctant charity of strangers. Piper, at only 9 years old, had taken on the responsibility of caring for her younger brother, protecting him from the dangers of the street, seeking food and shelter, assuming a role that no child should ever need to assume. And when Jasper fell ill, she hadn't hesitated to do the unthinkable, offering herself in a form of servitude to save her brother. The courage and sacrifice of this child, contrasted with his own selfish indifference, hit Sterling like never before. "How could I have become this kind of person?" he asked aloud to the empty room where he awaited news. "When did I stop seeing others suffering? When did money and power become more important than basic humanity?" The night advanced slowly, the hours dragging while Piper and Jasper fought their parallel battles in separate rooms, in different hospitals. Sterling refused to go home, to leave the hospital even for a few hours to rest. He alternated between anxiously walking the corridors and sitting motionless for long periods, lost in dark and self-critical thoughts. The golden brooch they had finally managed to remove from Piper's unconscious hand now rested in his suit pocket, a tangible reminder of the sacrifice and determination of a child he had judged worthless. His phone rang constantly, assistants, partners, lawyers, all wanting his attention for matters that once seemed urgent and now sounded trivial and empty. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Sterling was truly facing the consequences of his choices, his way of living, his distorted values, and the self-assessment was devastating. "Save these children," he whispered like a prayer, looking through the hospital window at the city now sleeping under a sky finally clear after the storm. "Give me the chance to fix what I've done, and I swear I will never again pass by someone in need without stopping to help." A week had passed since the fateful night of the storm. The hospital corridors, once cold and impersonal, now seemed almost familiar to Sterling. For 7 days and nights he had remained there, refusing to leave while Piper fought for her life. His elegant suit had long been replaced by simpler clothes brought by his driver, his normally clean-shaven face now covered with stubble, his eyes marked by deep, dark circles that testified to sleepless nights. For those who knew him before, the transformation was shocking. Not just physical, but something deeper had changed in him, any change in the vital signs. Sterling asked the nurse leaving Piper's room, the same question he repeated almost every hour, every day. During that week, Sterling had mobilized resources that most people didn't even know existed. Specialists in brain trauma were brought from other countries, cutting-edge equipment was purchased and installed, experimental medications were imported with special authorizations. To Jasper, now transferred to the same hospital as his sister, the best pediatric pulmonologists monitored his recovery day and night. Money, which was once the center of Sterling's life, was now just a tool to try to repair the irreparable. While waiting and observing, Sterling had discovered more about the two children. How their parents had died in a fire, how they were left with no one to care for them, how they survived on the streets with only Piper's courage and Jasper's resilience. "Mr. Sterling, I think you should see this," called the chief doctor, hurrying out of Piper's room. "Her brain patterns are changing. She may be beginning to wake up." Sterling's heart raced as he entered the silent room where Piper was resting. After days in an induced coma, the doctors had finally reduced the sedation, allowing her brain to try to find its way back to consciousness. Her small body seemed even smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by equipment and monitors. The external injuries were beginning to heal, but no one could say with certainty what they would find when, and if, she woke up. Brain damage was unpredictable, especially in cases as severe as hers. Sterling sat in the chair beside the bed, the same one where he had spent countless hours in recent days. He took Piper's small hand in his, noticing how delicate it was, how fragile it seemed, but also remembering the surprising strength with which she had held the brooch throughout the ordeal. This hand so small had carried her brother through the streets, had extended in supplication, had fought to save what she loved. "Piper," he called softly, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that Jasper is fine. You did it. You saved your brother." It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight tremor in her eyelids, a change in her breathing rhythm. Then, slowly, like someone emerging from the depths of a dark ocean, Piper's eyes began to open. Confused, unfocused at first, blinking against the room light that seemed too bright after days of darkness. Sterling held his breath, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode in his chest. The doctors had warned about possible sequelae, difficulty speaking, memory loss, personality changes, motor problems. Jasper was the first word that came from Piper's dry lips, almost inaudible, but clear as a bell to Sterling. "Where is my brother?" Sterling felt tears welling in his eyes. Of all possible first words, pain, confusion, fear, she chose to worry about her brother. Even after everything she had been through, her first thought was for Jasper. A strange and unfamiliar emotion filled Sterling's chest. Something he hadn't felt for so long he almost didn't recognize it. Pure admiration, not for wealth or power, but for something infinitely more valuable. Selfless and unwavering love. "Jasper is fine, Piper," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Thanks to you, he received the medication he needed. He's recovering quickly." Piper's eyes, still confused, focused on Sterling. A flash of recognition crossed her face, followed by something that looked like fear. She tried to move away, her weak body barely responding to commands. "You, from the restaurant," she mumbled, memory returning in fragments. "What happened? Where am I?" Sterling hesitated. How to explain everything? How to tell her about the accident, about how he almost killed her after denying help, about how his selfishness had nearly cost 2 innocent lives. The doctors had advised not to overwhelm her with traumatic information so early, to let her recover more before facing painful memories. But looking into Piper's frightened eyes, Sterling felt he owed her at least honesty. "There was an accident, Piper," he said gently. "You were hit by a car when you were running to sell the brooch. I was in the car. I brought you to this hospital, and I've been taking care of you and Jasper since then. I'm sorry, more than I can express." Before Piper could process this information, the door to the room opened. Jasper ran in, his face lit up with a huge smile, his light steps showing no sign of the illness that had almost killed him. During the week of recovery, while Piper remained unconscious, Sterling had spent many hours with the boy, telling him stories, bringing him toys, ensuring he felt safe and loved while they waited for Piper to wake up. "Piper, you're awake!" shouted Jasper, running to the bed and climbing onto it with the agility of a completely recovered child. "I knew you'd come back. I knew it." Piper's weak arms embraced her brother, tears flowing freely down her face. The embrace lasted long minutes, as if the siblings needed to reassure themselves of each other's presence, confirm that it wasn't just a dream. Sterling observed the scene, feeling simultaneously part of it and an intruder. The man who had almost destroyed this sacred bond between siblings, but also the one who had helped preserve it. "Look, Piper," Jasper said excitedly, moving back a little. "Mr. Sterling gave me this. He showed a small toy airplane, and he said we're going to live in a big house with a garden. It's true, isn't it?" Piper looked confusedly at Sterling, who felt the weight of that gaze like a judgment. It was time for the truth to discover if redemption was possible for someone like him. "Piper," Sterling began, carefully choosing his words, "during these days, while taking care of you, I learned more than I have in my entire adult life. I was a cruel and indifferent man, so consumed by money and power that I forgot what really matters. I can never fully repair what I did, the pain I caused, but if you give me a chance, I want to offer you a home, education, and all the care you deserve." There was a prolonged silence. Jasper anxiously looked between his sister and Sterling, sensing the tension, but not completely understanding. Piper studied the man's face, looking for something, sincerity perhaps, or some sign that she could trust this surprising offer. "Why would you do this?" she finally asked, her voice small but firm. "Out of guilt?" "At first, yes," Sterling admitted, determined to be completely honest. "But now, it's something more. You reminded me what it is to be human. What it is to love unconditionally as you love Jasper. What it is to sacrifice for someone. I want to learn more of these lessons, and if you allow me, I want to give you the childhood you deserve." Piper looked at Jasper, who smiled hopefully. Then she turned her gaze back to Sterling. "You didn't buy my brother that day," she finally said, "but you saved our lives today." Slowly, she extended her small hand to hold Sterling's. "I think we all deserve a second chance." Months later, Sterling's large mansion echoed with a sound that had long been absent: children's laughter. In the spacious garden, Jasper ran chasing a ball, his energy seemingly inexhaustible, his body completely recovered from the illness that had almost killed him. In the elegant library, Piper sat at an antique desk, absorbed in her studies. Her recovery had been slower, more difficult. Some days still brought headaches, and occasionally her right hand trembled when she was tired. But her mind remained sharp, her determination intact, and she absorbed knowledge with a thirst that impressed even the most experienced tutors. Sterling observed the children from afar, through the window of his rarely used office. His business continued, of course, but no longer occupied the center of his existence. He had discovered a greater purpose, a more meaningful mission than accumulating wealth. Using his resources to make a difference in the lives of vulnerable children like Piper and Jasper had been. On the wall behind his desk, a recent photograph showed Sterling, Piper, and Jasper cutting the inaugural ribbon of the Renewed Hope Foundation, created in honor of the children's parents. The foundation offered shelter, education, and medical care to street children, especially those without family. "Mr. Sterling?" Piper's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood at the office door, a book in her hands, her now healthy and shiny hair tied in a braid. "Yes, Piper?" "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." As she turned to return to her studies, Sterling felt a wave of gratitude. The little beggar who once pleaded for help had not only saved her brother, but had also saved the soul of a man who had forgotten the value of compassion. And that, he realized, was a gift infinitely more valuable than any wealth he had ever possessed. If the story of Piper, Jasper, and Sterling moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.